page 88. It's actually the title page to Unit 2. I don't think there's a page number on it, but it would be page 88. Oh, let's let Mitchell back in. Starting not just another chapter, but starting a whole new unit. Look at the title of the unit. Establishing a Nation. That's what's going to happen during this chapter, or not this chapter, but this unit. We're going to start a whole new country. We're not going to be part of Britain anymore. We're not going to be English colonies. We're going to become a whole new country on the face of the earth. Of course, called the United States. That country is going to turn out to be a country that is a force for good all over the world. All right, so you'll see there's 3 chapters in this unit. I believe our next test, we're going to do chapter 6 and part of 7. And then this next test, we'll do the rest of 7 and 8. All right, so it's coming up. Looking at the timeline, how many years are covered in this unit? How many years we cover?
25.
Just 25 years, right? Now just for fun, peek back, keep your finger here, peek back to page 1, where we had the timeline for the first unit. You notice it went from 1492 to 1775. Wow, the first unit covered almost 300 years of history. And this whole unit covers 25 short years. All right, because there's obviously a lot of very historic, very important things taking place during this 25 years. All right, so let's look at the timeline. Look at some of the highlights. 1776, there's that magic year. We're getting real close to that. That's the birth of our country. All right, 1781, we win the war. 1783, the peace treaty. 1787, the Constitutional Convention is held in Philadelphia. 1787. By the way, this is September 17th. You know what that means? This is Constitution Day. Here's what we mean by that. It was on this date, way back in 1787, when our founding fathers finally signed the Constitution, which is still the law of the land to this very day. That's why we know that you have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, privacy rights. That's why we know that in 47 days there will be an election. Why do we know that? Because it's all written down in that Constitution made in 1787, adopted on this day, September 17th. So today is Constitution Day. But we'll cover that in more detail later. Back to the timeline, 1789. We get our very first president, George Washington, takes office. All right, so let's get into chapter 6, looking on page 91. Excuse me. All right, so I'm continuing our events, excuse me, on our timeline. Now, obviously, I erased all the ones from the board because we had a quiz, right? And besides, I was running out of room. And this is not a new outline, this is continuing that old outline, which went all the way back to 1763, the end of the French and Indian War. That's when all the craziness started happening. The taxes and the Boston Massacre and Tea Party and Lexington and Concord, right? So now we're up to May 1775, the Second Continental Congress. By the way, where it says May 1775 and I put the arrow, what the arrow means is and ongoing. In other words, the Second Continental Congress wasn't just in May. It wasn't even just in 1775. It keeps on going all the way into the next year of 1776. So that's what I mean by the arrow. It's ongoing. All right, and Second Continental Congress. Does anybody remember what does Congress mean, basically?
Meeting?
A meeting, right? I think we know what second means, right? Right after the first. Continental means the whole continent, all 13 colonies. We're gonna have a meeting where we try to get all 13 colonies. We did that once before. That was called the First Continental Congress in 1774, if you remember. Check your timeline. All right, so now and that one, we had 12 out of 13, all but Georgia attended, and we held the meeting in Philadelphia. Well, the second time we do it, we hold the meeting in Philadelphia again, but this time we get all 13 colonies send delegates. All right, so what are they talking about at the Second Continental Congress in this meeting with delegates from all 13 colonies? Well, they're talking about what happened last month. Wait, what did happen last month? You sleeping? You shy? You stupid? What is it? What happened last month?
What, the first battle?
Yeah, where was that?
April morning?
April morning, Lexington and Concord, right? If you remember, that was April 19th, 1775. Hey, that's why timelines are important, right? Because that makes the story make sense. After Lexington and Concord, think about what just happened. That's a battle. There are men dead on both sides. Nothing like that had happened before. All right, that's not a protest. All right, that's not a tea party. That's an actual battle. Battles are fought during wars, right? So the war has started. A month later, a few weeks later, we meet in Philadelphia, figure out now what? Looks like we're going to war with our own country. Looks like we're going to war against the most powerful military in the world. Well, here's the now what. Here's what they decided to do. All right, two things you need to know about the Second Continental Congress. We did the Olive Branch Petition, and we raised an army called the Continental Army. All right, we're going to talk about them one at a time. First of all, a petition, you might remember, is a letter. We're going to send another letter to King George III. This one we call it the Olive Branch Petition. I bet you know this. What is an olive branch a symbol of?
Peace.
Peace. Right, it's kind of worldwide, the symbol of peace. And we're sending the king a letter, and this is remarkable. This is all you need to know about your founding fathers of your country. They were not a bunch of hotheads. They were not unreasonable. They were not just stubborn, didn't like authority. They're not looking for a fight or a war. They're not trying to pick a fight. They're not happy about Lexington and Concord. How do we know? Because the very next thing we did is we asked the king for peace. So basically, this is what we told him in the Olive Branch Petition. King, we're going to give you one last gesture for peace. We are Englishmen. We're proud to be Englishmen. We want to stay loyal to England. But we're not going to give up our freedoms. We're not willing to be second-class Englishmen. We're demanding our rights as Englishmen. Now, since this battles took place at Lexington and Concord, and King, we regret that. There's dead British soldiers, but you know what? There's dead colonists on our side too. We regret that happened. We don't want any more of that. We'd like to have peace. But we think now you see, King George III, how serious we are. We're willing to fight for it. We're willing to die for freedom. We're willing to kill your soldiers for freedom. But we're not looking for a fight. We'd like you to prepare and have peace with us. And give us our rights as Englishmen. Because now, King George III, you can see how important this is to us. Isn't that amazing? Even after the fighting started, even after the bloodshed, our founding fathers were still trying to achieve peace. But what did we learn about peace? How many sides have to want peace for there to be peace?
All.
Both sides, two sides, right? So we know we want peace because we're sending the king an olive branch. All right, so I like to think of it this way. In the olive branch, we're hoping for the best. That's not the only thing we did at the meeting. While we're hoping for the best, we prepared for the worst. We decided to raise an army. Think about it, as colonists, we don't have an army. We are English colonies. Our army is the British Army. Well, they're not on our side apparently, right? We don't have an army. We have a bunch of local militias. Right, Massachusetts had the Minutemen, Virginia had the Rangers, every colony, every community had their own militia, farmers with guns, right? But it's not organized. We decided to organize it. Take all those local militias, organize them into one army of all the 13 colonies. We called it the Continental Army. If you know anything about the military, you know there's always a chain of command, right? If you're in the military, you are required, you must obey the orders of officers that are superior to you, right? Privates obey sergeants, who obey lieutenants, who obey colonels, who obey generals, and so on, right? But there has to be somebody at the top, not a group, someone. One person has to be the top. We call that in the military the commander-in-chief. So if we're gonna raise an army, the Continental Army, we're going to need somebody to be in charge of it. Who did we choose?
George Washington.
Kateri?
George Washington.
George Washington. Was that a good choice? I guess time will tell, but yeah, that's a great choice, turns out. I mean, remember, we're a bunch of farmers with guns. It's not like we had a bunch of military professionals to choose from. But George Washington's a good choice. I mean, had he been in battle before? Yeah, remember the French and Indian War where he had the bullet shot through his coat? So he'd been in battle. He had proven himself as a good leader of men. So if we gotta choose one of these farmers with guns, it seems like George Washington, he shows some leadership abilities. Let's put him in charge. Turns out to be a great choice. So again, Second Continental Congress, the two important things we did: olive branch petition, we're hoping for the best. But we raised the Second Continental Army, we're preparing for the worst. Just in case, there's that phrase again, remember we talked about that last time? Another time, just in case. What? Because we know the king has to want peace too. If he wants peace, good, so do we. We're gonna have peace. We're gonna have our freedom. We're gonna have our rights as Englishmen. But if he doesn't want peace, well, then we're not having peace, right? We're getting ready for a war. We're gonna raise an army. So I want you to look up here at the screen. This is called the Great Seal of the United States of America. I bet it looks familiar to you. You've seen this. Even if you don't know it, you've seen it. It's on the back of a dollar bill. Every bit of it is symbolism. We're not going to get into the whole thing right now. Every bit of it is symbolism. Of course, the eagle is our symbol of freedom. But I want you to notice something. What's in his talons on this side?
A branch.
Olive branch, symbolizing peace, right? And of course, in his talons on the other side are arrows, which are weapons. That symbolizes war. Now here's what I want you to notice. I don't know if you ever noticed this. Which way is the eagle looking?
The peace.
He's looking toward peace. That's a message to everyone in the world. America, we are a nation of peace. We want to get along with you. We want to be at peace with you, whoever you are. Whatever our differences are, we're willing to live at peace. That's what this symbolizes. However, we are not going to give up our way of life. We're not going to give up our freedoms just to make you happy. As Patrick Henry said, life is not so dear and peace is not so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. We're not giving up our freedom just to have peace. We want peace. How do we know? Because that's the way the eagle's looking. But we also know both sides have to want peace. So we do. We're letting you know. Any country, terrorists, whatever, we want you to know. We want peace, but if you don't, we're ready for that too. Because we're not giving up our way of life. Now, look at the olive branch. Isn't that exactly what our founding fathers said? We want peace. Olive Branch. However, King George III, we're not. Gotta have peace at the price of submitting to your tyranny. We will have our freedom. And if you don't want peace, we're ready to fight. So from our founding fathers' days, from 1775 to 2020, that's still our attitude as Americans. That's still our message to the world. We are happy to get along with you and have peace. Just don't mess with our freedom, because then you're gonna have a fight on your hands, because we're not giving that up. It's liberty or death, as Patrick Henry would say, right? Any questions on the Second Continental Congress? Hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. Now, we have an army. I don't know how good it is, but at least we have an army, and it's one of those things, like we said before, we're hoping for peace, but, you know, isn't an army, wouldn't you like to have it and then never need it? Instead of someday it comes and you need it and you don't have it?
Mm-hmm.
So we got our army. All right, let's see how it goes. Well, check page 92. The king kind of responded to our olive branch. Not really. He didn't send a letter. He didn't really reply. But what he did is he hired, look what it says on page 92. He hired mercenaries. Time out. Mercenaries are soldiers, but they're not in an army that fights for a country. They don't have a flag. All right? They don't fight for their country. They don't fight for what they believe in. Mercenaries fight for money. Whoever will pay them. Usually they're former soldiers. They used to be in some countries' military, but now they join another group of mercenaries. We still have mercenaries today. Kind of. Right? Groups of former soldiers that if you pay them, they'll go fight. All right, well, the king hired a group of mercenaries known as the Hessians. And you did know that, the Hessians. Now, the Hessians were from Germany. Do not be confused. Germany is not helping England in this war. Germany isn't getting involved, because the Hessians aren't fighting for Germany. They're hired by King George III, the King of England. They don't care about England. They don't care about the colonies. They don't care about freedom. They're just like, you pay us, tell us who you want us to kill. All right, we're mercenaries. That's the Hessians. We call them in history the bloodthirsty mercenaries. Hey, everybody's good at something. These guys are good at war and they like it. All right. Now let that sink in. What did you just hear? We send the king a letter, olive branch, we want peace. He replies by hiring bloodthirsty mercenaries to kill us. Do both sides want peace? Apparently not. Are we gonna have peace? Nope, not unless we give up our freedom. That ain't gonna happen. So let's think a little deeper. What did we just hear? A bunch of farmers with guns has to defeat the most powerful military in the world and bloodthirsty mercenaries. Like their side needed help. The king hired mercenaries to help their side. He's already got the unfair advantage. Remember our silly example? That would be like me telling you 8th graders, all right, if we want our freedom, we have to fight against the United States Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Oh, and by the way, they hired a bunch of ISIS terrorists to help them. Yeah, come on, man. There's no way. All right, so that's kind of what our founding fathers were facing. They're like, wow, we already had the odds stacked against us. Now we hired the Hessians? You kidding me? We pretty much don't have much of a chance, do we? Well, like Patrick Henry said, liberty or death.
They could hire their own mercenaries.
But we didn't have any money. We didn't have money to, that's a good comment, but we didn't even have money to pay our own soldiers, let alone to pay mercenaries. Good thought, Ethan. All right, that leads us to our quote of the day. No, it doesn't, not yet. That leads us to page 94. My bad, page 94. I want you to look at, there's a subheading, two little subheadings there. One says loyalists, the other says patriots. Everybody see where I'm at?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me explain that. Unless you've been living under a rock all of 2020, you may have noticed that everyone in America is not getting along and agreeing on everything. Have you noticed that?
Mm-hmm.
We're not in perfect agreement on everything.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of division, a lot of arguing, protesting, rioting, even violence, right? For like going on 4 months now, somewhere in our country every night there's some violence. Because we're not agreeing on everything. Well, just so you know, that's not new. The disagreement is not new. Look at page 94. In those days, everyone in the colonies had to pick a side. They had to decide, are you going to be a loyalist or are you going to be a patriot? We're going to describe what they are one at a time. I want you to be thinking, if you were alive in those days, which one you would have been. All right, so a loyalist, here's how we get their name, loyalists. They decided they wanted to stay loyal to England. They wanted to remain loyal to King George III. They do not want, they're not going to join this Continental Army. They're not going to fight against their own country. They're going to stay loyal to England, loyal to their king. Now, some loyalists, I think they're the worst kind of people there are. Selfish, worthless people. Because some of those loyalists, this was their reasoning. They were thinking, look, there's going to be a war. Which side do you think's going to win? The side with the most powerful military and the mercenaries, or the side with farmers with guns? They're putting their bet on Britain. And they thought, when this war ends, I want to make sure that the king knows I never was against him. I was always loyal to him, and maybe he'll reward me with some land or some important position. I want to make sure I'm on the winning side. So in other words, those loyalists, they don't care about freedom, they don't care about England, they care about themselves, and that's it. Selfish, worthless, forget about them, get out of our way. There's always people like that. Don't be a person like that. Stand for something, right? However, there were other loyalists that I do respect. I disagree with them, but I respect their viewpoint. And it goes like this. Some loyalists were like, look, I believe in God. Do you think there were a lot of colonists that believed in God in those days?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of believers, a lot of Christians, partly because of the Great Awakening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So many of these people who decided to be loyalists said, look, the Bible is clear. The Bible says, obey your earthly masters. King George III is our earthly master. I have to obey him, because if I disobey King George III, then I'm disobeying God. I can't do that. So these loyalists are like, look, patriots, look, Patrick Henry, look, George Washington, look, I understand that King George III is a terrible king, all right, but he's our king. We're supposed to obey our authorities. And that's the truth. That is what the Bible says. That's why here at ECS, we know, you know, I know, my bosses know that in this classroom, I am your authority. You don't get to decide whether you obey me or not, do you? No, you are required to obey me. In fact, that's one of the big problems in our society. If you look around and watch the news every night, there are too many, especially young people, who no longer respect or obey authority. And also too many adults who don't require them or expect young people to obey and respect authority. And that's one of the big problems in our country. We don't have that problem at ECS. We understand that you will obey your authority. Right? Because that's biblical. And that's what the loyalists were saying. Man, we don't like King George III, but we gotta stay loyal. Because that's what God would expect us to do. All right, now let's talk about the Patriots. The Patriots are the Patrick Henrys, the George Washingtons, the people who are ready to join this army. They are willing to fight for their freedom, fight for their rights. After tomorrow's lesson, fight for their independence from Britain. So what are they, a bunch of heathens? They don't understand the Bible? Hold on. That leads us to our quote of the day. This person is somebody you've heard of, Benjamin Franklin. You all heard of Ben Franklin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, well, by this time, Ben Franklin's a pretty old guy, and he's not in the greatest health. If you've seen pictures of Ben Franklin, he's kind of a large guy. He's not going to be able to be a soldier. He can't even get on a horse, all right, let alone be a soldier, all right? So, but he's brilliant. He's one of our great founding fathers. Listen to this quote. Ben Franklin said, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God." In other words, he says, look, loyalists, I get it. You're supposed to obey God. So you think you should obey King George III. Ben Franklin saying, King George III is a tyrant. He's not fit to be a king of free people. Right? If you want to obey God, you have to rebel against the king. That is obedience to God. I agree with Ben Franklin. Here's an example. If I were ever to tell you, I'm your authority, right? But what if I would order you to do something you know is wrong? I tell you to steal or to hurt somebody, or I could come up with a million things that are sinful, immoral, wrong things. Are you supposed to obey me? No. Then you should disobey your authority, right? Because if you ever have a choice, obey God or obey man, which one should you do?
God.
Obey God. That's where you disobey your earthly authority. Now, if I tell you to do something you don't like, well, you still got to do it. But if I tell you to do something that you know is wrong, you better disobey me, right? Well, that's the point Ben Franklin's making. Yes, King George III is your king. He's your earthly authority, and you should obey him. But he's taking away our God-given rights to freedom. Look at me and pay attention to this. No person, no man has ever given you freedom. That's not where you got your freedom. Your freedom is a gift from God. That is how God intends people to live, as free people. Since no person ever gave you freedom, what can no person ever do? Take away your freedom. It's not theirs to take. God gave it to you, no one can take it. That's what Ben Franklin's saying. If you want to obey God, you got to live free and stand up for freedom. King George III has no business taking away your God-given right to freedom. Always remember that. Not just in history. Remember that your whole life. You do not need to concede your freedom to any person or government, because they have no right to take it, because they didn't give it to you. We're going to talk about the Constitution. Believe me, I'll emphasize it when we get to it. The Constitution doesn't give you rights and freedoms. It just spells them out. God gave you rights and freedoms. Since no person gave them to you, no person can take them. Ben Franklin and our founding fathers understood that. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. So here's the great thing about freedom. You get to think about it. Decide. If you had been alive in those days, would you have been a loyalist or would you have been a patriot? Being a loyalist would have been easier, right? Because you're probably going to end up on the winning side. Now we know it didn't turn out that way, but that was what the odds were, right? If you're a patriot, it could cost you something. In fact, it could cost you your life. So be careful which one you choose. But as Patrick Henry said, is life so dear, peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it. Give me liberty and give me death, right? Get to decide what you would have thought. All right, now that leads us to page 96. You'll see a pamphlet there entitled Common Sense. By the way, there is what I think should be our Great Seal. They didn't ask me, but I think this should be our Great Seal. You might recognize this scene. Here's the Hebrew slaves, the Egyptian army drowning in the Red Sea, the pillar of fire sent by God to protect his people, and look at the saying, rebellion and tyrants is obedience to God. That's what Ben Franklin proposed as our seal and our motto. Instead, we adopted the one, he lost the vote, right? We adopted the other one, and now our motto is E pluribus unum, whatever. I like this motto better. All right, so let's talk about, first of all, the guy who wrote Common Sense. Common Sense is a pamphlet written by Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine is an outsider. He's not even in college. He's an Englishman. He just got here. All right, but he has some strong opinions. He sides with the patriots. He thinks we need to fight against England, fight against the British Army. Why does he think that? Well, look what he entitles his pamphlet. A pamphlet, by the way, is kind of like a magazine or a newspaper or a flyer. They didn't have things like that in those days. So he just published this and then distributed it. Wanted as many people as possible to read this. He wanted patriots to read it so they would know they were right. He wanted loyalists to read it so they would become patriots. And he entitled it, look what he calls it, Common Sense. I think you all know what common sense means, right? Here, I'll define common sense for you. Common sense means duh. Right? It's so obvious, like everybody knows that. It's common sense. Interesting title. He's trying to tell everybody, you should be a patriot. You should fight for freedom. You should rebel against England. Why? Duh. It's common sense. Right? And here's one of his famous lines from his pamphlet. This is in every history book, right? These are the times that try men's souls. In other words, he knew they were living in historic times. They didn't know how the story was going to come out, but they knew they were historic times. By the way, you're not too young to hear this. 2020 is historic times, and 2020 is not over yet. It's far from over. There's still a lot going to happen. Maybe some crazy things. Now, I'm not trying to scare you because we already know God's in control, right? Always remember that. But we're still in for some crazy, this is historic time. We're going to decide which direction this country's going to go. Very historic year. All right, well, he knew that. In 1775, they were living in historic times. He said, these are the times that try men's souls. In other words, he's saying, these aren't normal times. These are not normal days. He's kind of saying, we're going to find out what you're really made of. In fact, keep a finger here. Go back to the beginning of chapter 6, page 90. Next to the picture, there's a quote from Thomas Paine. I said go back to page 90, the beginning of chapter 6. When I say that, that's what I expect you to do. There's a quote next to the picture from Thomas Paine. And it starts, these are the times that try men's souls, and then it goes on, what we obtain too cheaply, we esteem too lightly. In other words, if something comes easy, it's not that valuable to you. Think of if you're an athlete, and you know you got a game coming up, and the opponent is weak, and you don't have to practice that hard this week, because you know you're going to win. On game day, you go through the motions, you win, but whoop-de-doo, right? It's not that sweet of a victory because you already knew you were going to win. Wasn't much of a challenge. On the other hand, if you got a tough game coming up and you know they want it just as bad as you do, and they've been working hard in practice just like you have, and on that game day, you end up coming out on top, whew, that's a sweet victory, right? That's a lot more fun. All right, well, that's what Thomas Paine's saying. We're going to find out what you're really made of. Because our opponent's serious. I'm gonna show you more of the quote. This is not in your textbook, it's not in your curriculum. But even though you're just 8th graders, I think you can figure this out. I think you're ready to hear this. Look at this. There's Thomas Paine, Common Sense. These are the times that try men, so it's tough times. We're gonna find out what you're really made of, right? And then he goes on and he mocks some people. He says the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of his country. What does he mean? Summer soldier, sunshine patriot. Come on, 8th graders, I think you can figure this out. Anybody want to take a shot at that? What's he mean? I gave you a hint. He's mocking some people here. What do you think, Ethan?
I think he's like saying that a lot of people are gonna die
He is,
because he said shrink.
right? He is. He knows it's gonna be rough. It's gonna be violence. These are tough times. Try men's souls. But there's a little bit more hidden meaning there. What do you think? Sunshine patriot. Here's what he means. Hey, everybody's all rah, rah, go team go when things are going easy. When you're winning and things are easy and the weather's nice and everything's going well and your bellies are full and you're winning battles, where everybody's like, yay, go team. Or maybe even nowadays, everybody wants to be a patriot. Everybody can put a flag on their flagpole in their yard, sing God Bless America, chant USA, USA. Yeah, that's easy when you're comfortable. When you're sitting in your air-conditioned home, streaming Netflix, and everything's going well, you got plenty of meals. That's easy. But he goes, these aren't easy times. There's tough times coming. There's gonna be sacrifice required. And you know what? Some people are gonna prove to be summer soldiers and sunshine patriots, and when the going gets tough, they're gonna shrink. Forget them. But he says, but he that stands it now, when things get tough, they sacrifice for the cause of freedom, they deserve the love and thanks of man and woman. Those are the heroes. Not the ones who are all rah when things are going well. The ones who, when things get tough, and we're going to talk about some tough times coming up in lessons in the future. Tough times you won't believe, and they're going to stick it out. That's who deserves our thanks. You know what those heroes don't deserve? They don't deserve their statues and memorials being defaced and torn down. They don't deserve having their names erased from history, because their sacrifices is why we all get to enjoy freedom today. We don't have perfect heroes. This isn't a Marvel movie, all right? We have men and women who are American heroes of our past. None of them are perfect, but many of them made great sacrifices so we can enjoy their freedom, and we need to acknowledge that. He's saying that, hey, tough times are coming. Some people are gonna shrink when the hard times get here, but some of them are gonna sacrifice, and those are the ones that are gonna deserve our thanks. Which one are you? That's what he's saying in Common Sense. Fun to think. Nowadays, sitting here in your air-conditioned classroom with a full belly, you think you're hungry because it's almost lunch. Trust me, you're not hungry. You've never been hungry. Alright, easy to think, but still, it's fun to think. If you lived in those days, would you have been a loyalist? Would you have been a patriot? And if you say patriot, would you have been one of those sunshine patriots? Or would you be somebody that willing to sacrifice, not just for your freedom, but for the idea of freedom? Let that sink in. You pay the price for the idea of freedom. Patrick Henry, liberty or death. We're getting close. We're almost 1776. Tomorrow.